Hello again. We continue with trigonometry today. Here we go. A little review of algebra or pre-algebra or just plain math if you want to call it. To find x and solve for this equation, what's the inverse of dividing by 5? Well, multiply by 5, multiply by 5. Or you could see this as a proportion. I like to write this over 1 and then we cross multiply. 1 times x is x, and then you multiply 5 times 7/10 and you find your solution. Okay, here, if you do it the old way, what's the inverse of dividing by x? You multiply by x, multiply by x. But then we have to divide by this 0.5 to each side. So I like to do a proportion. This would be over 1. So then we say x times 5/10, 5 times x, and 20 times 1 is 20, and then divide by 5/10, divide by 5/10, and you have your solution. Well, now we go with cosine of 20. To do these problems, you need a scientific calculator. So you need a calculator that says sine, cosine, and tangent. Without this, we really cannot do these type of problems. So here, I go back to my proportion, which I like, and I'm going to put the cosine of 20 over 1. So here we cross multiply. X times 1, x. And here we multiply 8 times the cosine of 20, and we get our calculators. Please make sure that this little letter here is a D for degrees, because it could say R for radians, and we wanted to focus on degrees. Once that is okay, then we go ahead and punch. 8 times, here's the cosine of 20 equals. And there's your answer. Let's round it to a nearest tenth. 7 5/10. Okay, let's do this one now. I like to write this over 1 and do a proportion. X times cosine of 20, well, I'm sorry, cosine of 60, cosine of 60 times x. 20 times 1, 20. To solve for x, divide by cosine of 60, divide by cosine of 60. So x equals, and we go back to our calculator, 20 divided by cosine of 60 equals 40. So that side would be 40. Now let's go straight into the trigonometry here, triangles. If I want to find this side, and I'm looking at this angle, well, this one would be called opposite, and this, remember, in front of the 90-degree angle is always the hypotenuse. So I like to write my little shortcut here, which is my clue, SOHCAHTOA. If I'm looking at opposite and hypotenuse, I'm going to use sine. So we set it up. The sine of 65 degrees equals, what is opposite? X over hypotenuse. Hypotenuse is 11. So to solve this, I like to write over 1. 1 times x is x. 11 times the sine of 65. And we go to our calculator. 11 times the sine of 65 equals, well, I'm going to round that to 10. So this side would be 10. And indeed, it is smaller than the hypotenuse. Remember, in a right triangle, the hypotenuse is always the largest. So if you would get a number larger than 11, something's wrong. Okay, now let's go to this one. In relationship to this angle, well, this is always the hypotenuse because it's opposite the 90 degrees. And this would be called adjacent because this is the opposite and we don't want that one. So adjacent hypotenuse, that would be cosine. Cosine of 32 equals adjacent, which is 15, over hypotenuse, which is x. I like to set it up as a proportion, and we cross multiply. Cosine of 32 times x, that would be just x times cosine of 32. 1 times 15 is 15. To solve for x, divide by cosine of 32, divide by cosine of 32. These cancel. X equals, calculator, 15 times cosine of 32. That would be 12 and 7/10 rounded. Okay, so the hypotenuse would be 12 and 7/10. Uh-oh, something's wrong. The hypotenuse has to be larger than the leg. Let me go back. Adjacent over hypotenuse. Maybe did I punch something wrong? Yes, I did. Oh, look here, how interesting. I put 15 times. And look what it says right here. 15 divided by. So by my answer, I knew something was wrong. So I go back to my calculator and I put 15 divided by cosine of 32 equals. Now it says x is 17 and 7/10. Let's go back. The hypotenuse is indeed larger than the adjacent. Now I'm satisfied with my answer. So see, I don't just work through a problem quickly and just decide that's the correct answer. I want to check my answers. In relationship to this 55-degree, this would be called opposite, and this would be called adjacent, because this is always the hypotenuse. So opposite and adjacent, that would be dealing with tangent. Here's opposite and adjacent. So the tangent of 55 degrees equals opposite, which is 20, over adjacent, which is x. Set it up as a proportion and cross multiply. X times tangent of 55 equals 20 times 1 is 20. Divide by tangent of 55. What you do to one side, you do to the other. Cancel, x equals. Now, I'm going to be sure and not punch times. It's 20 divided by the tangent of 55. And that side would be approximately 14. And let's check it. 14, that's shorter than 20. That would be okay. All right. See you next session or the next. Bye-bye.